Richelle Flanagan has over 18 years experience practicing as a dietitian. She has spent much of her career advocating for better nutritional care for people living with chronic disease. Being diagnosed with celiac disease and subsequently with young onset Parkinson's disease, Richelle was a board member of the Celiac Society of Ireland and chair of their clinical advisory board. Now she is a committee member of the Dublin branch of the Parkinsons Association of Ireland, a World Parkinson's Congress ambassador, and a founding member of the PD Avengers, as well as the Women's Parkinson's Project. She's passionate about using her dietetic and advocacy experience to change the lives of people living with Parkinson's. Richelle, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome to PD Wise.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for asking me.
My pleasure. Let's start at the beginning. Tell us how your Parkinson's journey began. When were you diagnosed? How did you discover you have Parkinson's? How old were you?
Yeah, well, I was 47, and basically I was actually pregnant with my second child, and I basically work as a dietitian, and I was in my clinic, and a patient had come back to see me after like a 5-year gap or something, and I took out the record card to write in it, and I noticed that my handwriting was much bigger 5 years previously, and I thought, okay, that's a bit strange. And then I tried to make my writing bigger, and I couldn't make it bigger, and I thought, okay, that's really odd. So it was huge, like it was like minuscule in comparison to what it had been. So I obviously, got on the net and searched to see, what is the cause of small handwriting, and micrographia came up, which is a symptom of Parkinson's. And it was the only thing I could find disease-wise that was really associated with micrographia. So I thought, okay, that's strange. And then I was actually skiing, believe it or not. Well, I wasn't skiing because I was 3 months pregnant, but my skiing with my family, and my husband came off the slope, and I remember saying to him, it's really strange. I was drinking a hot chocolate. My hand kept shaking, and I remember just thinking, I just said to him, God, I hope it's not Parkinson's, and the penny kind of dropped between my handwriting and the bit of the tremor, which I haven't got a tremor type of Parkinson's, but I did for that month of my pregnancy. It was weird. And then I was at a Bruce Springsteen concert, and I was, shaking my hands in the air as you do. And I noticed that my right hand wasn't, shaking as well as my left. And I thought, okay, that's, so it was all really subtle stuff. Yeah. I had a pain in my shoulder as well. I was going to a physio for work on my arm. It was just kind of giving me a bit of jip. I'd carry my handbag on my shoulder. I'd find that it was really kind of painful. So basically, it was just those kind of things. Went to my GP and said, can I get a referral to a neurologist? And when I went to see him, he said, you're very fit and healthy. And I kind of went through the journey a lot of people do. And that was, I got an MRI to check I didn't have, brain cancer. I had a nerve test, to make sure it wasn't trapped nerves. Then eventually said, well, okay, look, we'll do a DAT scan. But I had to wait until my daughter was born and finished breastfeeding before I could have a DAT scan. So she was about 8 months at that stage. And the DAT scan came back positive, confirmatory of Parkinson's. So so it was kind of like a delivery of a much wanted second child with a diagnosis of Parkinson's was kind of shook our world. But, look, I suppose in the scheme of things, I could think of a zillion other things that potentially could be worse. So, it was something I could live with. But, took me a couple of years to really get my head around it, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Your story is so similar in a lot of ways to many stories that I hear, these subtle symptoms that in isolation don't seem to be, all that big a deal, but when they start to sort of add up or you link them together, and if you know anything about Parkinson's or you get on the internet, you quickly discover there's a whole sort of batch of symptoms that we can have. So how long ago were you diagnosed?
So 5 years ago. Well, it's probably, because my daughter's 5.5. So so it was probably kind of 6 years in terms of was when I was pregnant with her. But they didn't actually officially diagnose me until, she was born and finished breastfeeding. But I kind of knew myself
Yeah.
the symptoms. But like, if I hadn't been a health professional and hadn't been, so the fact I was writing that they were so subtle, I probably could have carried on for years if I hadn't picked it up myself, because, they weren't sort of really obvious. But I suppose it gave me the benefit, I suppose, of being able to kind of intervene early in terms of being able to do something about it sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned you don't have a lot of tremor now. What's it like for you living with Parkinson's? What are your sort of symptoms? What are your bigger challenges?
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, so far, it's been fairly mild. It's stayed the similar. The micrographia is the biggest one. So I don't have the tremor dominant. I would say it's more the rigid sort of type. So to be kind of in terms of my right side, particularly in my right arm, so to be typing, writing, that sort of thing. Dropping stuff, and, when you kind of get a bit slow and, your grasp isn't quite as good. In terms of the motor symptom, that would be sort of the main thing, on that side. I mean, at the beginning, I really struggled with fatigue, and I kind of, put down the fatigue to having a baby and all that. But when I started on medication, oh my God, it was just like, it was like when I was diagnosed with celiac disease, I had a lot of fatigue then as well. And when I went on the gluten-free diet, it was just like, you sort of, when you're permanently tired, you just kind of adjust to that until you suddenly realize, oh my God, that wasn't normal,
Right.
So definitely going on the Parkinson's medication made a big difference to my fatigue. So all in all, it's kind of just more the subtle sort of slowness of movement around my shoulder, my arm. My leg is a little bit affected, but not really much, to be honest. Very, very subtle.
Yeah. Well, one of the things about, those of us who are diagnosed at younger ages with young onset, we're often, still raising our children in the home and working, full time. And so it's easy to just think, I'm tired because of all the things I have going on in my life.
Yeah.
And you don't think about a Parkinson's overlay on top of that. So what surprised you so far about having Parkinson's and living with this illness?
I suppose, the thing that I suppose surprised me was just how much dopamine impacts so many parts of our body, So for me, it's like, it's all the small things, so it's definitely affected my eyesight, it's affected my swallow, it's affected my pelvic floor, it's affected my shoulder in terms of kind of like a shoulder sort of issue, a rotator cuff issue. So it's all these kind of little subtle things that just kind of have a kind of an additive effect, I suppose. And just, I think I've done so because being a dietitian and health professional, I'm interested, a lot of interest in research in that, and just researching the condition and just realizing how powerful these neurotransmitters are, and I think that the other thing that's really surprised me is that, like, really, we have one pill that hasn't changed in 60 years, and that's best you got. I find that kind of mind-blowing that we are so behind the curve in terms of other chronic diseases like cancer and diabetes and heart disease. Like, we are the poor relation, and considering that the brain conditions are exploding and will continue to explode, we're really not getting the sort of care and the research funding. And I find it amazing that something that we're all put on a 3 tablets a day, where that tablet absorption is so affected by so many things by the time it gets to our brain, that that someone hasn't come up with a better solution. I'm amazed with all the R&D that's out there. So that's probably one of my most kind of, I just can't quite understand that, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, you're involved in a number of projects that are trying to raise awareness and to advocate for, better treatments, more research. I want to talk to you about those here in a moment. But yeah, I mean, it's carbidopa, levodopa, the gold standard, as we call it. It's been around roughly 60 years, and there haven't been a lot of, well, there have been some advances, but nothing has sort of trumped, carbidopa, levodopa as the gold standard goes. And so you would think, to your point, that we would have more given the amount of time and the amount of, science and technology that we have at our disposal, you would think that we have more.
Yeah. I suppose, even if you think of the advances in diabetes care, where you can have an insulin, because I worked with patients over the years with type 1 diabetes, and, when the pump came in, it just changed so many lives for people. They could adjust their insulin, dose according to what they ate, etc. And now I know they're doing that with duodopa and stuff, but, and I look, it's more, convoluted probably in terms of the levodopa, in terms of how it breaks down, etc. But yeah, I'm amazed there isn't more funding going towards making our lives, with those of us who live with Parkinson's, making our lives better. There's a lot of focus on prodromal and cures, and, and I'm kind of going, well, what, kind of be good if you sort of help the people who actually are living with it. There's the kind of thing like, oh, well, they have it now, and sort of, you've lost your neurons till, sort of thing. But, from all the research I've done, there's a lot more we could do. And like in terms of the nutrition side, that just blew my mind when I did a lot of research in the nutrition. I was going, okay, like this has completely been ignored in the care of people with Parkinson's, So, I think we need to jump up and down a lot more. We're a bit too quiet a community, and obviously that's partly because unfortunately it affects, 80% is older people who, metaphorically and physically are probably quieter because of the disease.
Yeah, well said. It's interesting you mentioned the absorption issue a few moments ago, and my wife and I were talking today about this very issue, and timing medications around the amount of protein you have for a meal, and it gets complicated, and that's just a very small sort of example of, I think, what you're talking about. We need in the way of more advances. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, like the thing is, in terms of, as a dietitian, I've spoken with a lot of people with Parkinson's, and I do a callback service, a dietitian callback service for the Parkinson's Association here in Ireland. Started that a couple of months ago, and like it's just amazing the amount of people who just aren't told about that basic, in terms of just time your meds separate to your meals, and and I think the other thing is that in terms of women tend to absorb the levodopa quicker than men because of our body weight, and just generally women tend to have a quicker absorption of a lot of drugs. The same with heart drugs and that as well. So, but it's not in any way titrated depending on your body weight. It's just everyone gets 25 over 100 milligrams Cinemet a day. And then you've got people who are then progressed on to 6-7 tablets a day, and then trying to time your meds around your meals is a freaking nightmare. So that's very difficult for people. And I think sometimes maybe it's not really taken into consideration. And also people sometimes, if they're not timing their meds properly, they end up having to kind of go up in dosage because they're not being switched on, but it's actually because their medication, they're not taking it properly, so then they get accelerated quicker through the regime of drugs, where maybe so many other things could help them before, to stop them having to go up in excess medications.
Yeah, one of the surprises for me has been how much timing and consistency matters when you're taking your medicine, to be consistent, but also timing it with respect to meals. And also if you exercise and your metabolism is sped up, that has an effect on your absorption and the length of time you get from a dosage, and all those kinds of things. So couldn't agree with you more. You mentioned women. Talk about the Women's Parkinson's Project. I'm really fascinated with that. I think it's yay you and your team, because this is such a needed effort, and I'm glad you're waving the flag. But tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, I suppose we was actually, I didn't meet my two co-founders, so Shri and Kat. We were all at the World Parkinson's Congress in Kyoto in 2019. But Shri, said to me that she did meet me, and I was like really embarrassed because I don't remember. But we kind of connected sort of online after, because basically, as I said, I kind of hid my Parkinson's for the first 2 years because as a dietitian, I felt the stigma, you know, I was just thinking that people are going to maybe think of me differently, that I'm not going to be as competent. No, my colleagues are going to think differently. My clients are going to think differently. And then I went to the WPC, and it just blew me away when I met, you know, there was a whole range of people with young onset, and, you know, like, you know, a number of them were great in terms of, like, Omatola was there, and Kathleen Kiddo and Becca Miller, and, you know, they were getting up and they were, you know, telling their story. And I kind of thought to myself, you know, I was a big advocate in terms of celiac disease, and thought, I don't have a problem talking about it and being an advocate for that. So why am I, you know, fearful? And that was really, you know, something that maybe sort of think twice and say, okay, you know, I need to stand up and stand up for myself. And it's not going to change if I don't talk about it. And to be honest, it was more of a burden hiding it. And I could hide it because I didn't have a tremor. But, you know, it was a mental burden on me not being who I was, that I just happened to have Parkinson's, and that was just part of me, you know. So it was kind of liberating, the WPC, from that point of view. And to say, I connected with the others subsequent, and then we got together on a thing called Marco Polo, which is a kind of a video messaging sort of thing. So I'm obviously in Ireland, and they're in the States and the East Coast or the West Coast, and so we started sharing with each other, and you know, sharing the issues we were having in Parkinson's, but then sharing about life and family, and then lockdown sort of happened, and that sort of, you know, accelerated the connection between us. And then we sort of were talking about things like, we'd noticed coming up to our, you know, respective menstrual cycles that our Parkinson's symptoms would get much worse the week before we'd have a period, you know, and we'd all sort of separately noticed this, you know, and was thinking, that's kind of strange. And then we kind of just felt that, you know, women weren't really been taken into account. So things like dyskinesias, women tend to suffer more from dyskinesias. And that's obviously a big issue in terms of the levodopa absorption, because if you absorb too much of it, you know, then you can potentially have more dyskinesias. So there was kind of a number of things that weren't really been talked about. And we just, you know, thought, right, you know, we're going to do something about this. And we just said, you know, we wanted to raise the voices of women, and that's how it started. And I suppose really as well, I had engaged with an organization called the Women's Brain Project, because they're an advocate group, or they're a non-for-profit that focuses on brain conditions that are more affected in women. So Alzheimer's, for example. And I had reached out to them about, you know, whether they would consider, you know, Parkinson's being in the same sphere. And they were great supporters of ours. And I saw what they were doing and thought, you know, we need to stand up for ourselves. And that's really how the Women's Parkinson's Project. So, you know, our mission is to raise the voices of women with Parkinson's for better treatment and better management and better research. And it's not just ultimately for women, but if we learn more about women, ultimately could also impact drug development for men with Parkinson's, you know. So there's a lot about our hormones that are in the mix with regard to Parkinson's.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing that work. As I said, it's so important. And I think one of the sort of myths about Parkinson's is that it's an older person's disease only, and that it's mostly a disease among men. And, you know, the numbers between men and women, as I understand it, are getting much closer together now. And so more and more, you know, women who may have had Parkinson's all along and just have not been diagnosed because of biases and, you know, diagnosis. But for all those reasons and more, I'm glad you're doing this work and look forward to following it. Tell us about PD Avengers.
Yeah, so the PD Avengers as well, you know, so I'd obviously got to meet Larry Gifford, and I remember distinctly being in the same room in Kyoto, and I stood up and said, you know, we really need to sort of, you know, consider coming together. And, you know, Larry was thinking of the same thing. And so there was a kind of a meeting of minds. And so there was a meeting set in Kyoto where we all came together, those with young onset. And that was the kind of rumblings of, you know, dissent amongst the YOPDers. And then to be fair, then Larry, after, I don't know how many months after Kyoto or what stage, himself and Tim, Tim Haig and Sonia Mather sort of came together and sort of said, look, you know, we need to do something. And they had seen the book Ending Parkinson's It was done by Bass and Michael and
Ray.
yeah.
Right.
And that was kind of the catalyst, really. So we all kind of came together. Larry reached out to a number of us. There was about 13 of us were the original kind of founders, came together. We did strategy meetings. We, broke off and did sort of workshops together, and we sort of brainstormed, what we needed to do. And, the theme was very much to kind of, think global, act local, and to sort of build the grassroots advocacy worldwide. And that's kind of where it started from, so it's grown now. I think we're like 5,000 members around the world, and the guys set it up as a nonprofit now, and there's a lot of partners, MD Fox and PMD Alliance and, Brian Grant and James Davis Finney and Ukraine Parkinsons. It's great to see them all kind of, supporting it. So hopefully it'll go further to raise the voices,
Yeah, and I think the piece you led with about coordinating efforts and sort of de-siloing to the extent that happens, and it happens in Parkinson's as well as in any other sort of community or movement that I'm aware of. And so I think PD Avengers is doing important work in that vein too. You mentioned you're a dietitian. I noted that in your bio at the beginning. I assume you eat well, but what else do you do to take care of yourself?
Well, I suppose, one of the things I just, love sport. I loved playing field hockey back in the day. I used to play a lot when I was younger. So I love that. And, I suppose really in terms of, at the moment, I'm in the thick of, I have a 15-year-old and a 5-year-old. So a lot of my time is taken up probably with kids at the moment. But one of my passions more recently was sea swimming, because, and that's not something I used to like. I'm a Taurian, so I like the land. But I basically, Larry Gifford and Becca Miller had sort of come up with the idea just to do a fundraiser to bring people from around the world with young onset to the next WPC, which was supposed to be this year, but is now next year in Barcelona in 2023. So because we'd seen the impact that WPC had on us as young onset, we wanted to extend that and try and build up a sort of pot of money as a grant fund. So a number of us, there was about 23 of us, agreed to do sort of a birthday fundraiser. So I did one in May of last year, and I decided to throw myself in the sea every day of the month of May, because I'd learned that, your dopamine gets triggered by being in cold water. And I tell you, it surely does that. So I was amazed. Like the first day I stayed in a minute, I was absolutely frozen. And people kept saying, oh, you'll adjust, you'll get used to it. And it was true. By the end of the month, I was in 25 minutes swimming in the sea. It was amazing. And now I do it once a week. So I've been doing it all through. I literally have not stopped. I've done once a week at least every week since I've done the dunk in May. So we're at the coldest time now of the year, and it is Baltic. But wow. It's really invigorating. But the other thing is, it's with the friends, it started this momentum of friends, came out. So it's about 30 different people from different walks of life came out and did it with me over the month. And it was really emotional, because we just come out of COVID, or coming out of it, the isolation, and being together was just really special. It still is. It's, being with friends, gives me a great dopamine hit, so for me, it's about doing the things that get my dopamine going. So it's exercise, my family, I like my work. It stimulates me as well in terms of, projects I work on are really important to me as well, so love dancing. That's really good for the old dopamine as well.
Yes, all that's great. And I was thinking, I live in Austin, Texas, and if the water gets below 70 degrees, we're chilly here. So hats off to you and your team there in Ireland and other places where it's much colder.
We call the dunkers. That's what we call ourselves now.
Yeah, keep it up. It's obviously doing a lot of good. So a couple more questions for you. What gives you hope as you look ahead? We have challenges before us. You've mentioned some of those, but what gives you hope?
Yeah, well, I think to be fair, there are a lot of amazing researchers out there. They're really, they're really focused, and they're really looking for answers for us. And I suppose, on one hand, when I went to Kyoto, it was like, oh, within the next 10 years, and someone else was saying, well, the last time I was at WPC, they said that too, so there's, there is a certain, kind of, I don't know whether the cure of my lifetime, because with Parkinson's, it's so many different versions of it.
Right.
It's difficult, but I do think if you think about it with cancers, there's so many different types of cancers, but they have managed to, in terms of say breast cancer, be very specific about gene type and what treatment you get. So I do feel quite confident that they will be able to find treatments for some people. And maybe there are more curative initially, but I do feel that they will find ways to slow progression. I do think we are, touching around the skirts of finding something. And for me, that's the hope in terms of, if they stopped it now, okay, if some deficits, but not, hugely disabling right now. So yeah, that would be the hope that they continue on. I think the other hope would be that we make a breakthrough in terms of advocacy for people with Parkinson's, that we get more funding, because there's only a limited amount they can do when they don't have, we don't get half as much money as Alzheimer's, and I find that really frustrating, because there are many people with Parkinson's who suffer from dementia, and we're not really taken into account. And I think there's a kind of an ageist approach to Parkinson's, which I feel quite frustrated about, in terms of, it's kind of this sort of sense of, well, you get a touch of Parkinson's when you're older, sort of thing. But there's a lot of people suffering out there needlessly. And I just think, I have a lot of hope for the advocacy and patients that are beginning to sort of stand up more against that, and challenge more and ask for more, because that's the only way you're going to get things to change,
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And on the research side, it's on the one hand frustrating for all the reasons because the change comes slowly. On the other side, though, you and I both know, a number of people who have dedicated their lives to this work, and they wake up every day and work long hours, in service to better treatments and cures. And we are making incremental progress. It's not quick enough for me, and probably for you either, but I appreciate you sort of balancing the impatience with the reality that we are making progress. And I do think, drugs or other therapies that help arrest the progression are really where a lot of the smart money is right now. And I'm encouraged by what I hear as well.
Yeah. I mean, one of the other things as well is that I hope, that they realize, and it's kind of a frustration, is that, back to the point of they sort of say, men have, there's 1.5 times more than women in Parkinson's. But when you put that into reality, it's only 60-40. So still 40% of the population are women, so that's a big part of the market as such. But also there's definitely answers within the female gene and the female hormones, in terms of, why is it that some, in terms of, they say the majority of those women are diagnosed postmenopausally because estrogen drops. So what's going on there, and then why, for example, the likes of myself were diagnosed earlier, and what's the switch, and what's going on for men that they don't, that it is higher and it is more aggressive. Is that because you don't have the hormones? And is there something that we can do to, give men a form of, female hormone that would help that, So I think, I'd really hope that, sex and gender becomes more, the cornerstone of every research study is done, that they look at why is there a difference. And the other thing then I'd really hope is that they realize that, up to 20% of the 10 million that have Parkinson's in the world are under the age of 60. That's practically the same amount of people, total amount of people with MS in the world. And yet MS gets a lot more focus in terms of research and drug trials, I think, than we do with Parkinson's. So we kind of really have to change the message. And I really hope people start listening to that and actually start focusing on that 20%, because I think there's a lot of answers in that 20% for the older people with Parkinson's,
Yeah, well said. I agree with you. Final question. I wish we had more time. We'll do this again, I hope. But last question for today. Thinking back 5-6 years, someone's newly diagnosed. What would you say to your newly diagnosed self now that you've got a few years behind you, what would you want other people who are newly diagnosed to know?
Well, I think, I've spoken to a lot through the work I've done with the Parkinson's Association here in Ireland. And, I think it's hard. Everyone has to go through that journey, in terms of the certain element of denial. It's a shock. It's, you don't want to hear it. But I suppose for me, ultimately, as I describe it, it's like an unwanted guest that I have to look after, and that's just what I have to do. But it's not going to control my life. I'm going to look after it so that I can continue, to live my life the best that I can live it. And, that a certain amount of control is in our hands in terms of not. I've spoken to a lot of people who have hidden away as a result of Parkinson's. And I just keep on saying to them, Parkinson's wants to make everything in your world small, wants to make your walk small, your writing small, your voice small. So you have to do everything big to basically beat it off. And that's what I say to people, really.
Yeah. Well, you're doing a lot of things big, and I really appreciate it. And I just urge you to keep it up. We need it, and really an honor to have you on PD Wise and to know you. And, we'll do this again, but thank you for your time today. And again, thanks for all you do.
Thanks a million, Alan. Thanks very much for all you do and for asking me on to chat with you. It's been great. Look forward to coming back again.